Los Angeles in the early 1980s was a city that never truly rested. Even after midnight, the streets breathed with life. Cars moved like glowing insects along the freeways, streetlights hummed softly, and warm air drifted through open windows. People believed the night belonged to them. They worked late shifts, watched television until sleep claimed them, or sat on porches enjoying the quiet. For many, home was a final shield, a place where the world could not reach them once the doors were closed. That belief began to crack on a warm night when police radios crackled with reports that did not seem connected at first. A violent break-in in one neighborhood, a brutal assault miles away. The victims were strangers to each other. Their lives did not cross. The locations were scattered, stretching across Los Angeles and nearby cities. Detectives treated each case as separate, routine work. At least, they tried to. But something felt wrong. The crime scenes carried a heavy silence, as if the walls themselves had witnessed something they could not explain. In some homes, windows were smashed. In others, doors showed no sign of forced entry. Bedrooms, once private and safe, became places of horror. Investigators walked carefully, aware that the air held fear as thick as smoke. There was no clear motive. No theft that made sense. No pattern that offered comfort. At first, the public heard little. Short articles appeared in the back pages of newspapers. A brief mention on the evening news. People shrugged and turned the page. Los Angeles had always been a city of crime stories. One more didn't seem worth losing sleep over. Then the reports increased. Within weeks, similar attacks appeared again. And again. The details were disturbing, but even more unsettling was how unpredictable they were. The attacker did not choose one type of victim. Young or old, rich or poor, men or women, it didn't matter. He struck without warning, under the cover of night, leaving behind confusion and terror. Survivors spoke of waking suddenly, sensing a presence before seeing it. A shape in the darkness. A voice whispered or a sudden movement. Many could not remember his face clearly, only the fear that froze them in place. Others remembered his eyes, cold and empty, reflecting the dim light of a hallway or street lamp. As summer deepened, so did the dread. Los Angeles was a city built on sunshine, yet now the nights felt heavier. News stations began linking the cases. Reporters spoke with cautious words, but viewers understood what they were implying. This was not random. Someone was hunting. The nickname came from the media, sharp and unforgettable. The Night Stalker. The name spread faster than the facts. It turned fear into something solid, something people could imagine following them home. Every sound after dark felt suspicious. The creak of a floorboard, the rattle of a window, a passing shadow cast by headlights. People changed their habits. Families stopped sleeping with windows open, despite the heat. Extra locks were installed. Curtains stayed closed. Porch lights burned until morning. Some residents bought dogs. Others bought guns. Neighbors who barely spoke before now watched each other's houses with nervous eyes. Police departments across the city were under pressure. Detectives worked long hours, comparing notes, studying photographs, searching for anything that could connect the crimes. But the Night Stalker seemed to slip through every net. Each attack looked different. Different weapons. Different methods. It was as if the killer was deliberately trying to confuse those hunting him. Behind closed doors, officers admitted what they could not say publicly. They were afraid they were dealing with someone unpredictable, someone who enjoyed fear itself. The public sensed this fear, even if no one spoke it out loud. Late-night television hosts joked less. Radio callers shared their anxiety. Parents warned children not to walk alone, even during the day. The city's rhythm changed. Los Angeles was still alive, but it was no longer relaxed. One night, a woman sat awake in her bedroom, listening to the ticking of a clock. The sound felt louder than usual. Her window was closed, the curtains drawn tight. She had checked the locks twice before going to bed. Still, sleep refused to come. She imagined footsteps on the roof, hands on the glass. She told herself she was being foolish, yet her heart raced with every passing minute. She was not alone in that feeling. Across the city, thousands lay awake, staring at ceilings, counting breaths until dawn. For the first time in their lives, Night felt like an enemy. Police briefings became tense. Sketches were released, then updated, then questioned. Witness descriptions conflicted. Some said the attacker was tall. Others said average height. Hair descriptions changed. Clothing details blurred. Fear had a way of distorting memory. The Night Stalker remained faceless. As weeks turned into months, the question everyone asked grew louder. How could someone move so freely through a city this large? How could he enter homes without being seen? The idea that he might be watching, choosing his next target, sent a chill through the warm California nights. There were moments of hope. A tip that seemed promising. A suspect briefly questioned. Each time, the city leaned forward, desperate for closure. And each time, the hope faded, replaced by frustration and dread. The killer struck again. Each new report reopened old wounds. News cameras gathered outside homes marked by flashing police lights. Neighbors whispered behind taped-off streets. Detectives walked with heavy steps, knowing the public was watching, judging, waiting. The Night Stalker was no longer just a criminal. He had become a symbol of vulnerability, a reminder that even in a city of millions, safety could vanish in an instant. Some blamed the police. Others blamed the media. Some blamed the victims. Fear made people search for simple answers, but there were none. The truth was darker and harder to face. There was someone out there who did not fear the law, who did not fear being seen, who thrived in the shadows. As the summer heat lingered, Los Angeles felt trapped between sunset and sunrise. Days passed quickly, but nights stretched endlessly. People learned to measure time by sirens and news updates. They learned to sleep lightly, if at all. And somewhere in that restless city, the Night Stalker moved silently, unseen, leaving behind only questions and fear. The nightmare had just begun. While the city searched for a monster hiding in the darkness, Richard Ramirez lived his days in plain sight. He did not look like the face of fear shown on television screens. He was thin, quiet, and often forgotten moments after being seen. People passed him on sidewalks, sat near him on buses, or stood behind him in store lines without a second thought. That was part of what made him so dangerous. He blended into the background of Los Angeles, a city full of strangers who rarely looked twice at one another. Richard Ramirez's story did not begin with sudden violence. It grew slowly, shaped by a childhood filled with instability and exposure to things no child should have seen. From an early age, he learned to associate fear with power and pain with control. Those lessons did not fade as he grew older. Instead, they twisted and hardened inside him, forming a dark inner world he never shared with anyone. As a young man, Ramirez drifted. He had no fixed routine, no stable home, and no clear direction. He slept where he could, sometimes with friends, sometimes in abandoned buildings, sometimes out in the open. He moved constantly, not because he was running from something, but because he felt no reason to stay anywhere. This rootless existence made him almost invisible. There were no neighbors to notice patterns, no coworkers to question strange behavior, no landlord to remember his name. During the day, Ramirez wandered through the city. He visited libraries, movie theaters, and downtown streets. He watched people closely, studying how they moved, how they spoke, how they lived. To him, the city was not a community. It was a hunting ground filled with unlocked doors and trusting routines. At night, that hidden part of him surfaced. Ramirez did not plan his attacks with the careful structure of someone following strict rules. His crimes were chaotic, driven by impulse and desire rather than logic. This lack of pattern confused investigators and protected him for far too long. One night he used one method, the next night something completely different. To police, it looked like the work of multiple criminals. To Ramirez, it was freedom. He believed he was smarter than the people searching for him. Every news report fed that belief. Each time the police admitted they were still looking for answers, his confidence grew. He followed coverage of the crimes closely, paying attention to what details were released and which were kept secret. In his mind, he was playing a game, always one step ahead. Yet behind that confidence was a fragile ego. Ramirez needed control. He needed to feel powerful in a world where he felt invisible during the day. The night gave him that power. Darkness hid his face, silenced his footsteps, and turned ordinary homes into places of fear. Investigators began to realize that the Night Stalker was not choosing victims for who they were, but for how accessible they were. Ramirez looked for opportunity, not identity. An open window, a quiet street, a house that appeared empty or asleep. This randomness terrified the public even more. There was no way to predict who might be next. Police worked tirelessly to understand the man behind the crimes. They built profiles, studying psychology textbooks and past cases. They asked themselves what kind of person could move so easily between extreme violence and complete anonymity. What they didn't know yet was how close Ramirez often came to being seen, and how many chances there were to stop him early. Witnesses later remembered small details. A strange man lingering too long near a house. Someone testing door handles late at night. A figure standing under a streetlight, then vanishing. At the time, these moments felt insignificant. Only later did they gain meaning. Ramirez's appearance added to the confusion. He did not maintain himself well. His clothes were often dainty, his hair unkempt. Sometimes he looked older than his age, sometimes younger. Depending on the lighting and the fear of the moment, witnesses described him differently. These changing descriptions slowed the investigation and filled the city with uncertainty. Despite the chaos, one quiet clue followed him from scene to scene. A shoe print, unusual and distinct, appeared where he had walked. At first, it seemed like just another detail among many. But as detectives laid photographs side by side, the similarity became impossible to ignore. The same pattern, the same size, over and over again. Still, knowing there was a shoe print was not the same as knowing who wore it. Ramirez continued to move through the city, unaware that the walls were slowly closing in. His confidence made him careless. He took risks, staying longer than necessary, returning to familiar areas, believing the darkness would always protect him. He underestimated the persistence of those hunting him. During this time, Los Angeles lived in two worlds. By day, life continued. People went to work, children went to school, traffic filled the streets. By night, fear took over. Windows glowed with lamps left on until sunrise. Radios murmured softly to break the silence. Dogs barked at shadows that may or may not have been real. Ramirez felt that fear. He sensed it in the air, in the way people locked doors faster, in the way neighborhoods grew quieter after sunset. Instead of stopping him, it fueled him. Each frightened headline reinforced his belief that he mattered, that he was powerful enough to change an entire city's behavior. But power built on fear is unstable. As the crimes continued, law enforcement agencies began working together more closely. Information was shared across departments. Patterns were debated late into the night. Slowly, a clearer picture began to form. The Night Stalker was not a ghost. He was human, and humans made mistakes. Ramirez was still free, still hidden among millions, but the distance between him and capture was shrinking. He could feel it, even if he didn't fully understand why. His movements became more erratic, his decisions more reckless. The careful invisibility he relied on began to crack. Unseen by him, the city was learning how to look again. And soon, Richard Ramirez would no longer be just a shadow in the night. By the time summer reached its peak, fear had soaked into Los Angeles like heat trapped in concrete. It no longer arrived suddenly after sunset. It lingered all day, quietly building, waiting for night to fall. People woke up already tired, not from work or routine, but from the stress of knowing that another night was coming and that no one could say for sure what it would bring. The news no longer treated the attacks as isolated incidents. Anchors spoke with measured seriousness, choosing words carefully, yet their eyes revealed the truth. This was panic. Every broadcast opened with updates, even when there were none. Viewers stared at the screen, hoping for reassurance and finding only reminders that the Night Stalker was still free. Descriptions of the suspect filled the airwaves, but they seemed to shift every few days. One witness claimed he was tall, another said average. Some remembered curly hair, others straight. His age changed depending on who spoke. These differences confused the public and deepened the fear. If no one could clearly describe him, how could anyone recognize him? Rumors spread faster than facts. In grocery stores and gas stations, People whispered theories. Some claimed the killer was part of a cult. Others believed there were multiple attackers working together. Every unfamiliar face became suspicious. Every stranger was watched a little too closely. Police departments were flooded with tips. Phone lines rang constantly. Some calls were helpful. Most were not. Innocent people were reported simply for walking at night or knocking on the wrong door. Officers followed lead after lead, often finding nothing but frightened citizens desperate to feel safe again. As the pressure grew, law enforcement made a decision that would change the atmosphere of the city. They released a partial description of the suspect and warned residents to stay alert. The intention was to empower the public. Instead, it unleashed a wave of anxiety. People took the warning personally. Neighborhoods transformed almost overnight. Streets that once felt relaxed became tense and watchful. Curtains stayed closed even during the day. Porch lights burned long after sunrise. Some families placed furniture against doors. Others slept in living rooms together, afraid to be alone. Gun stores saw long lines. Hardware stores sold out of locks and window bars. Alarm systems became common, even in areas that had never considered them before. The sound of a barking dog brought relief instead of annoyance. Yet no amount of preparation seemed enough. Night after night, people lay awake listening to the smallest sounds. The hum of a refrigerator, the tick of a ceiling fan, the distant siren that might mean something terrible had happened somewhere else. Every noise carried a question. Was it just the house settling? Or was someone outside? Fear changed how time felt. Minutes stretched endlessly in the dark. Sunrise became something to celebrate, a signal that survival had been achieved for another day. But even daylight offered no real comfort. The thought remained that the Night Stalker was still out there, resting, waiting for the next opportunity. Police investigators worked around the clock. Desks filled with files, maps, and photographs. Coffee cups piled up beside exhausted detectives who refused to go home. They reviewed crime scenes again and again, searching for connections they might have missed. They replayed survivor statements, listening not just to words but to pauses, to breaths, to emotion. One detail began to stand out more clearly as the chaos continued. Several survivors mentioned the same thing, even if they didn't realize its importance at the time. The attacker's eyes. They described them as cold, empty, or strangely calm. That detail did not solve the case, but it suggested something chilling. This was not a man acting in panic or desperation. This was someone in control. The shoe print, once a quiet detail, became a focus. Investigators traced its origin, discovering it came from a specific brand and model not widely sold. It was a small step forward, but in a city as large as Los Angeles, it still felt like searching for a needle in the dark. Meanwhile, the Night Stalker continued to haunt the city's imagination. Parents stopped letting children play outside alone. Elderly residents slept with lights on and televisions playing softly to break the silence. Couples argued over safety measures, over whether to stay or leave, over whether fear was controlling their lives too much. Some people tried to act normal, refusing to let fear win. They went out at night, attended parties, laughed loudly. But even among them, there was tension. Eyes scanned rooms unconsciously. Doors were checked more than once. The media coverage intensified, and with it came criticism. Some accused the press of spreading fear. Others argued that the public had a right to know. Police struggled to balance transparency with the risk of causing hysteria. Every decision felt heavy, every statement carefully weighed. Then came a moment that shifted everything. A survivor, shaken but determined, gave investigators a clearer description than anyone before. This time, the details were sharper. The shape of the face, the way he moved, the sound of his voice. Combined with other witness accounts, a more consistent image began to emerge. Shortly after, another witness reported a suspicious car seen near one of the crime scenes. The vehicle description matched across multiple incidents. For the first time in weeks, investigators felt something close to hope. The pieces were still scattered, but now they seemed to belong to the same puzzle. Police quietly increased patrols in certain areas. Unmarked cars cruised through neighborhoods. Officers watched from shadows, just as the killer had. The city didn't know it yet, but the balance was beginning to shift. Still, the fear did not fade. Each night that passed without an arrest made people wonder if hope was foolish. The Night Stalker seemed unstoppable, like a force rather than a person. He struck without warning, then vanished, leaving behind silence and sirens. Inside his mind, the growing panic pleased him. He followed the news closely, absorbing every headline, every warning. The fear he saw reflected back at him confirmed what he believed about himself. He was powerful. He mattered. An entire city bent its behavior because of him. But that attention came at a cost. As the city watched more closely, so did he. And watching made him restless. The thrill he once felt began to require more risk. He stayed longer in places he should have left quickly. He returned to areas he knew. He began to believe he could not be caught. That belief would prove dangerous. By late summer, Los Angeles felt like a city holding its breath. The tension was visible in tired faces and short tempers. People snapped at small things. Patience wore thin. Fear had become a constant companion, shaping thoughts and decisions. And yet, beneath the panic, something else was growing. Determination. Detectives refused to give up. Citizens shared information more carefully. Survivors found the strength to speak. The Night Stalker had taken the city by surprise, but he had also united it in a way no one expected. The question was no longer whether he would be caught. It was when. As the sun set on another restless day, Los Angeles braced itself once more. The darkness was coming, but this time, it felt different. The fear was still there, heavy and real, but now it was joined by something new. The sense that the nightmare was reaching its breaking point. The moment the Night Stalker's face appeared on television, the city changed again. This time, the fear was mixed with recognition. People leaned closer to their screens, studying the image as if their lives depended on it. Because in many ways, they did. The man staring back did not look supernatural or larger than life. He looked thin, tired, almost ordinary. That ordinariness unsettled people more than any horror story could. The photograph spread quickly. It appeared on news broadcasts, newspapers, and flyers taped to storefront windows. Radio stations described his features again and again. His name was finally spoken aloud, no longer hidden behind a nickname. Richard Ramirez. The Night Stalker had an identity. For the police, this was both a breakthrough and a risk. They knew that once a suspect realized his face was public, he might run, hide, or act even more violently. Patrols increased. Officers stayed alert, knowing that the next few days could be the most dangerous of all. Ramirez saw the broadcast too. He recognized himself instantly. The game had changed. The sense of control he once felt cracked under the weight of exposure. The streets that once felt safe now felt narrow and hostile. Every passing glance seemed suspicious. Every police siren felt closer than before. He began to move without a clear plan, driven by panic rather than confidence. He boarded buses without knowing where they would take him. He walked for hours, avoiding familiar areas, trying to disappear into the endless movement of the city. But Los Angeles was no longer the same city it had been weeks earlier. It was awake, watching, and ready. People recognized him. A man at a convenience store noticed his face matched the image he had seen on television. A woman on the street felt a sudden chill and crossed to the other side when she saw him. Whispers followed him as he passed. Ramirez felt eyes on his back, heavy and accusing. The fear he once created had turned against him. Police received calls from across the city. Sightings poured in, some false, some real. Officers raced from one location to another, chasing shadows and possibilities. The tension was unbearable. They knew he was close, but close was not enough. Then, late in the day, a call came in that felt different. A group of residents reported seeing a man matching the suspect's description in their neighborhood. He was walking quickly, nervously, looking over his shoulder. Officers were dispatched immediately, but before they could arrive, something unexpected happened. The people did not run. Instead, they followed. The neighborhood, once paralyzed by fear, reacted with a sudden burst of courage and anger. This was the man who had stolen their sleep, their peace, their sense of safety. Shouts rang out. Someone pointed. Another person blocked his path. Ramirez realized too late that the crowd was closing in. He ran. Through streets and yards, Past parked cars and startled residents, Ramirez tried to escape. His body was exhausted, weakened by days of stress and little rest. The city itself seemed to resist him, every turn leading to more people, more shouting, more fear turned into fury. He stumbled and fell, injured and bleeding. Hands reached for him, not to help, but to stop him. The crowd surrounded him, voices overlapping, emotions spilling out after months of silence. It was chaos, raw and uncontrolled. Police arrived just in time. Officers pushed through the crowd, weapons drawn, shouting commands. They pulled Ramirez away, shielding him from further harm. The man who had terrorized an entire city now lay helpless on the ground, dirty, bruised, and silent. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. In that moment, the Night Stalker was no longer a shadow. He was just a man in custody. News of the arrest spread like wildfire. Radios interrupted music. Television stations broke into regular programming. People hugged, cried, and sat down in shock. Some laughed nervously, unsure how to react now that the fear they had carried for so long was suddenly gone. But for the police, the work was far from over. Ramirez was taken into custody and questioned. Detectives approached carefully, aware that this man had thrived on attention and fear. They focused on facts, evidence, and procedure. Fingerprints were taken. Photographs were logged. Every step was documented. The evidence began to line up with terrifying clarity. Fingerprints matched those found at crime scenes. The shoe print, the one detail that had followed the Night Stalker through the investigation, matched shoes linked to Ramirez. The pieces that once felt scattered now locked together. Inside the interrogation room, Ramirez remained mostly quiet. He listened more than he spoke, his expression unreadable. The confidence he once felt had vanished, replaced by something closer to emptiness. The game was over. Outside the station, crowds gathered. Reporters waited for statements. Cameras flashed. The city wanted answers, and it wanted justice. Police officials spoke carefully, confirming the arrest without celebrating. They knew the pain was too deep for simple relief. Survivors heard the news with mixed emotions. Some felt an immediate sense of release, as if a weight had been lifted from their chests. Others felt anger, knowing that no arrest could erase what they had endured. For families who had lost loved ones, the relief was quiet and heavy, touched by grief that would never fully fade. That night, Los Angeles slept differently. Lights were still left on, locks still checked, but there was a softness in the air that had been missing for months. Sirens felt less threatening. Shadows seemed less alive. For the first time in a long time, people allowed themselves to believe that morning would come without another nightmare. In the days that followed, details emerged steadily. Investigators revealed how close Ramirez had come to being caught earlier, how small mistakes and moments of chance had finally brought him down. The public listened closely, trying to understand how something so terrible had lasted so long. The arrest became more than a headline. It became a turning point, a moment when fear shifted into reflection. People asked hard questions about safety, about community, about how someone like Ramirez could move unseen for so long. For law enforcement, the case was a lesson in persistence. It showed the cost of underestimating chaos and the importance of cooperation across departments. It also showed the power of a city that refused to stay silent. Richard Ramirez was transferred to face the justice system, his movements now controlled, his freedom gone. The Night Stalker, once a name whispered in the dark, was reduced to a file number, a defendant, a man waiting for trial. But even as he was led away, the impact of his actions remained etched into the city's memory. Streets that had once echoed with fear now held stories that would be told for generations. Parents would remember how they held their children closer. Neighbors would remember how they learned to look out for one another. The chase had ended, but the reckoning was just beginning. Los Angeles had survived the night, but it would never forget what it had faced, or how close the darkness had come. The courtroom felt heavy long before the trial officially began. Every seat was filled, and the air carried a quiet tension that pressed down on everyone inside. Reporters adjusted their notebooks, families held hands, and survivors sat silently, gathering strength for what they knew they would have to face. Outside, cameras waited, but inside, time seemed to slow. This was not just a legal proceeding. It was the final chapter of a nightmare that had haunted an entire city. Richard Ramirez was brought in under guard, his movements controlled, his face watched by dozens of eyes that had waited months to see him confined. He looked smaller now, stripped of the mystery that once made him seem everywhere and nowhere at once. There were no shadows to hide in, no darkness to protect him. The Night Stalker was a man seated at a defense table, facing the weight of his own actions. The trial unfolded slowly, methodically. Prosecutors presented evidence piece by piece, careful and relentless. Photographs from crime scenes were shown, drawing quiet gasps from the courtroom. Fingerprint matches were explained in clear, steady voices. The shoe print, once just a pattern in the date, was now a central thread tying everything together. Each detail brought the story into sharper focus, turning fear into facts. Survivors took the stand, one by one. Some spoke softly, their voices trembling as they described waking in the night to a presence they could not forget. Others spoke with controlled anger, refusing to let fear define them anymore. Each testimony carried its own weight, but together they formed a powerful reminder of the human cost behind every headline. These were not statistics or stories. These were lives altered forever. Families of those who did not survive sat through every word. Their grief was quiet but unmistakable. In their faces, the city saw the true price of the Night Stalker's crimes. There were moments when the courtroom felt too small to contain the pain inside it. Throughout it all, Ramirez showed little reaction. He listened, sometimes staring forward, sometimes glancing around the room. His lack of visible emotion unsettled many. Some saw it as defiance. Others saw emptiness. Whatever it was, it offered no comfort to those seeking understanding or remorse. The defense attempted to explain him, to place his actions within the context of his past. They spoke of a troubled childhood, of influences that led him down a dark path. The court listened, but sympathy was limited. Explanations did not erase choices. Trauma did not excuse terror. As days turned into weeks, the city followed every development closely. News updates became part of daily routine again. But this time, the tone was different. There was no panic, only anticipation. People wanted closure. They wanted to know that the long nights of fear had an ending. When closing arguments arrived, the courtroom was silent. The prosecution spoke of responsibility, of justice, of a city that had endured and now demanded accountability. They reminded the jury of the evidence, of the voices they had heard, of the pattern that led back to one man. The defense spoke of mercy, of complexity, of the idea that no story is ever simple. But simplicity was not what the jury was asked to decide. Truth was. The jury deliberated behind closed doors, and those hours felt endless. Outside, crowds gathered, waiting for a verdict that would echo far beyond the courthouse walls. Some prayed. Some argued quietly. Some simply stood, lost in thought. When the jury returned, the room held its breath. The verdict was read clearly and firmly. Guilty. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Some people cried openly. Others closed their eyes, releasing tension they had carried for months. There was no cheering, no celebration. The moment was too heavy for that. Justice, when it finally arrives, often comes with silence. Sentencing followed, sealing Ramirez's fate. The judge spoke with gravity, acknowledging the suffering caused and the fear inflicted upon countless lives. The sentence ensured that Richard Ramirez would never walk free again. The Night Stalker would spend the rest of his life behind bars, removed from the darkness he once ruled. As he was led away, there was no dramatic outburst, no final speech, just the sound of footsteps fading down a hallway, carrying with them the end of an era of fear. Outside the courthouse, the city reacted in its own quiet ways. Some people hugged strangers. Others went home and slept deeply for the first time in months. Many simply stood under the open sky, breathing in a sense of safety they had almost forgotten. But closure is not the same as forgetting. In the weeks and months that followed, Los Angeles began to heal, slowly and unevenly. The routines of life returned. Windows opened again on warm nights. Porch lights were turned off. Laughter drifted back into streets that had known too much silence. Yet beneath that return to normalcy, memories remained. For survivors, The trial marked a turning point, but not an ending. Nightmares lingered. Sudden sounds still caused hearts to race. Healing came in small steps, supported by family, friends, and the knowledge that the man who had hurt them could no longer reach them. For law enforcement, the case became a defining moment. It reshaped how investigations were approached, how information was shared, how patterns were recognized. The Night Stalker had exposed weaknesses, but he had also strengthened resolve. Lessons learned would save lives in the future. The media gradually moved on, as it always does. New stories replaced old ones. But the name Richard Ramirez remained etched into the city's history, a reminder of a time when fear ruled the night. True crime documentaries, books, and conversations would revisit the case again and again, trying to understand what happened and why. Yet understanding had limits. Some questions would never have answers. What exact thought crossed his mind before each crime? What moment could have changed his path? Those mysteries remained locked away, irrelevant in the face of the damage already done. What mattered most was what the city learned about itself. Los Angeles learned that fear can spread faster than violence, but so can courage. It learned that communities matter, that awareness and cooperation can turn the tide. It learned that even in a place of millions, individuals make a difference, whether by speaking up, staying alert, or refusing to look away. Years later, people would still remember where they were when the Night Stalker was caught. They would remember the feeling of relief, mixed with sorrow. They would remember the long nights and the quiet mornings that followed. The darkness did not disappear forever. No city is ever completely safe. But the shadow that once crept through open windows and unlocked doors was gone. The Night Stalker had been stopped, and in the silence that followed, Los Angeles reclaimed its nights, carrying forward the memory of what it had endured, and the strength it had found when fear threatened to take everything away.